Everybody, we ready?
Okay. Well, go ahead.
I'm Larry Powell. I'm chairman of the Nuclear Materials Committee. I'd like to welcome everybody today. Happy to see everybody here. I'd like to ask everybody, if you're going to speak, to state your name and whether you're a member of CAB or a member of the public or whoever you represent. Also like to let everybody know that we are being, and idle chit chat is picked up, so be careful what you say, and try to keep on the agenda topics during the meeting. There's a public sign-in sheet, and all people who are going to have anything to say should sign in. And of course, the CAB members hopefully have already signed in. We've got 5 recommendations, and it's my understanding that all of these recommendations have been answered. And if I could ask the committee members to maybe go over these recommendations on your own, I think at our next meeting, we will suggest that we close all 5 of these recommendations, unless you look through the recommendations and find a reason that we wouldn't close that. Okay, at this point, I'd like to introduce Maxine Maxted, and she will give us our point of contact status update. Maxine.
Sorry, I'm fighting at home. HK is continuing with their readiness assessment in the various stages of processing fuel. These stages will allow for purification and separation of uranium from the fission products and other waste materials. So as you know, the uranium then gets downblended and sent to TVA for reuse in commercial fuel for power production. The waste materials and the fission products get sent over to the tank farms, and they get eventually turned into a glass. So dissolution of spent fuel is expected to begin again in April once we finish our spring outage. And HK continues to work on modifications to allow receipt of the Canadian liquid target residue material. So HB line and nuclear materials, I'm sorry, you have a bunch of facilities, so you got a bunch of bullets. HB line is working through completion of actions to recover from the agitator event in March, which I gave you all an update on at the last meeting. Once these recovery actions are completed, HB line will continue to process plutonium for feed material to MOX. K area continues destructive examinations of the 3013 plutonium containers to ensure the plutonium is safely stored and continues to be safely stored. It also supports shipment of those 3013 containers to HB line for processing. Plutonium blend down capability for non-MOX pool materials is also being implemented in K area. 235F is conducting a readiness assessment to allow replacement of glove box components in preparation to begin risk reduction activities. Some of those activities, we're going to replace the bladers, we're going to clean the windows, and we're going to install some lights. L area is conducting startup activities for the newly installed shielded transfer system. We're very proud about that. It got installed on Monday. The modifications will allow us to receive the Canadian NRU/NRX fuel, which is heavier and longer than our typical material test reactor fuel. We also continue to support fuel receipts from FRR and DRR, and we will continue our shipments to Canaan for fuel processing. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxine. Okay, I got a little ahead of myself.
Can I just ask this quick question? I don't know if it might be information. What's going to be starting to be processed in April?
More of the spent fuel of the 1,000 bundles.
Which, any particular ones?
I don't know off the top of my head, but we do already have a flow sheet developed that has identified those bundles.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else? Like I said, I got a little ahead of myself. I did not introduce my my members, and I'd like to start with David and let everybody introduce themselves as we go around.
David Hoyle.
Dawn Gillis.
Dan Kaminsky.
Andrew Bush.
Thank you. Is anybody online? Okay, nobody's online. Okay, we've got a presentation, Nuclear Materials Management Plan, Jay Ray from DOE.
Yeah, you have your label? No, I don't. Or I guess I have one right here, yeah. So I don't need to bring one, Pat always has one. Alrighty, I'm Jay Ray, and I'm here to present a presentation on nuclear materials management program. Did a similar presentation last, I think it's March. So this is a little bit of an update of that. And I work for Tony Polk, who isn't here yet. Oh, Tony is here. And I work with Maxine for Tony and Nuclear Materials Program Division. Alrighty, so the purpose is to go over the work plan item regarding materials management program, and what we do in the nuclear materials facilities, and also provide you an overview of that. And of course, this is the cap slide, and I've highlighted the facilities that are in Passive Wires organization. There's 235F, and I think Maxine touched on all of these. The 235F, where we're doing the risk reduction activities, K area, which is next there, where we have plutonium and some uranium storage there, and it's stored in drums, 55-gallon drums, and then in special containers within those. L Basin, where the fuel is, that Maxine has. H Canyon, where a lot of the processing occurs on site, and then SRS that we interface with, and they provide analyses and flow sheet development. And a flow sheet, if you ever hear that term, is simply the lab determining at what pH, at what molarity of acid, under what conditions, the amount of chemicals that we add in order to be able to dissolve materials in the canyon. And then you can also see the other interfaces. We've got, of course, DWPF. The canyon is able to send some waste directly to DWPF, and it goes into a sludge batch. We can also send waste up through the tank farm, and then there are also, of course, interfaces with solid waste and other, and then there's also an FH lab. Where is?
It's on there.
There, it used to be on there. So that's an analytical lab that interfaces closely with H Canyon and HB line, which I'll talk about in just a second. And also L Basin has analyses that are done there also. But that's where our samples are sent, either processed or accountability samples for making sure that we've accounted for the nuclear materials that's been introduced into the facility. And list of acronyms, but I think all the acronyms last year I resubmitted the presentation and spread them all. So I don't think you're going to find them. You might find some on this one, but I think in the rest of the presentation you shouldn't have to struggle with acronyms. So today I'm going to provide assumptions that we're guided by, and then missions that we're currently engaged in. So again, you can see the facilities that are operational right now. We've got H Canyon. We can talk about HB line. The HB line is a facility that sits on top of H Canyon. H Canyon is a very large facility, and I've got a couple of slides coming up about that. But it's close to 1,000 foot long, about 130 feet wide, feet tall. Lots of concrete, 3 to 6 foot thick. A base pad that is 5 foot thick underneath the facility. About 1/3 of it is buried underground. And then an HB line. So H Canyon is accessed by overhead crane. And so most of the work that occurs in the canyon is all remotely done. Not a whole lot of hands-on work. HB line, on the other hand, has glove boxes in it meant to handle
smaller quantities of material, and it is very much a hands-on operation. And I think Maxine talked about the plutonium oxide as a potential feed for MOX later on, and that's where that material is going. The spent fuel that Maxine talked about is going to the canyon directly. The next facility, K area, as I mentioned, that's where our plutonium and uranium is stored. A lot of the plutonium across the DOE complex was consolidated or is being consolidated in K area. And it's stored in 55-gallon drums. And then, of course, L area, spent fuel, most of that material is stored underwater. There is some material that's stored dry. And what's in L area is primarily spent fuel. And then I also mentioned the supporting facilities, but here they are again. The F area, H area, we call it FH, Analytical Lab. SRS, which is also works with us to develop our flow sheets, as I mentioned. We also interface with liquid waste, including EWCF, and also E area for solid waste, as I mentioned. 235F, again, is deactivated. It's not being used currently. We had used it for plutonium-238 mission years ago, decades ago. We then used it as a storage facility, and now it is undergoing some additional deactivation, and we're shortly in the next few years begin what we call intrusive work into the existing Pu-238 cells and begin removing some of that plutonium-238 that is orphaned in there. There are also other deactivated inactive facilities that are not addressed, and that's F Canyon, FP line, receiving basin for offsite fuels, and C area. So here are a couple of pictures of those main facilities again. K area is off. K area is off to the right. It's an old reactor facility, as well as L area there. So you see a lot of commonality between the construction of those. At one time, we had 5 operating reactors at the site. K area, L area, C area, which is also still has the lights turned on and is used for some purposes, storage of heavy water that I'll get into in a little bit, and also used for housing people. And then PNR reactor, I don't know if you've heard about those, some of the new folks, but those have been entombed for long-term layout. And the other facility is H Canyon. The concrete on H Canyon starts right here and actually goes off the screen and would be somewhere over here. There is a tunnel that extends, or a part of the facility that we call a tunnel. Part of that is concrete, and then part of it is either metal-sided or transite-sided. And this is about 800 and something feet. If you include this part, it's close to 1,000, so I mentioned. The tunnel areas where we bring in spent fuel on rail cars from this facility, or these 2 levels, that's 1, that's 2 right there. This is what we call HD line. And this is the HD line, what we call soft structure. This is metal or transite-sided, and this is where a lot of the engineers and so forth are located. But the actual processing material is located within the concrete structure. And this sits on top of the canyon, and sometimes we refer to that as the 5th and 6th levels for HD line. And so other ways that we can bring materials into the canyon, top of here. So this is the south loading dock, where we can bring in semis or trucks to offload material. Over here is what we call the truck well, which is also where we can bring materials in. We bring sample returns back from SRS and from FH lab and bring those in tanks, and we can offload that material, process it through the canyon, and send out the waste when it needs to be sent to waste. So those are the 3 main ways that we have of getting material into the canyon. the tunnel over here, the south loading dock, and then also the truck well. So just general assumptions for nuclear material processing or storage, support safety operations, plutonium, and we can also disposition other materials. We have dispositioned neptunium and other special nuclear materials. Department of Energy, Environmental Management, and National Nuclear Security Administration non-proliferation mission. We had a large campaign that began in about, well, actually, while the facilities were operating, we were dissolving materials, but we concluded dispositioning all of the site materials, all the uranium, bringing that into the canyon, dissolving it, purifying it, blending it down, and sending it off to TVA. That campaign one, if you want to call it, ended in at the end of 2011. And that campaign sent about 301 metric tons of uranium, low enriched uranium, to TVA, and they made commercial nuclear fuel out of it. If I remember right, and I don't have it written down in my notes, but I think it was the equivalent of about 500 weapons that could have been made from that material. And we dispositioned it, and we were able to turn it into another resource, which was to make electricity from it. Or we didn't do that, the TVA did. We just supplied the LEU, and then they made the fuel. But that was a very good mission and very important to the national security of the country and really the world. And if you were to take all of that material and actually run it in South Carolina for electricity, and again, South Carolina is not within the TVA network, but I think it would have powered the homes in South Carolina for 11 years. So we're quite proud of that. And then we also support the efficient operations and also try to minimize waste generation. One of the things, and it's on another slide, but one of the things we were actively involved in last year, especially was re-examining how we generate waste and what we can do to minimize the waste that is sent out to the tank farm. Okay, so H Canyon assumptions and some of the missions that are ongoing there. There was a group of fuel over in L area that was sodium reactor experiment fuel, and it was judged to be vaccine, potentially vulnerable to long-term storage. So we dissolved that, and we're sending those directly to DWTF. And like I said, for some materials, especially plutonium, and this material also, we were able to send this to DWTF directly, and that's ongoing. I think we've transferred about a third of that material to date. So we dissolved it, and now it's no longer a vulnerability or potential vulnerability to LRAs. So after that ended in August 2014, we were able to begin another campaign, and very similar to what I call campaign one, so the material was sent to TVA. We've now begun to blend down low enriched uranium, and the difference between this material and the SRE is we're actually going to recover the uranium as we did before in the previous campaigns, and we're going to blend that down to LEU, and then sometime around the beginning of 2017, the end of 2016, we'll probably be shipping that off to LEU or to TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. Okay, H Canyon will process, so one of the benefits of actually processing a group of materials over an LRE is about a third of what LRE expects to get of the aluminum class fuel. H Canyon has the ability to dissolve aluminum class fuel, but not stainless class fuel. And we're going to dissolve and LRE has those. We're going to dissolve about a third of that material. Now, what that's going to do for L area is allow them to continue to receive foreign and domestic research reactor fuels through 2035. The foreign fuels right now are or by NEPA, ending pretty much in 2019, and then the domestic fuels look like they'll probably end in about 2035. But if we didn't process a subset of this material in the canyon, Area would have to build and install new racks, which are actually very expensive to do. And in order, the allowance for doing the spent fuel is we went through a NEPA process that was concluded back March, April of 2013 that will allow us to do up to 1,000 bundles of fuel and 200 hydrocores. And HYPER is a high flux isotope reactor that's at Oak Ridge. And right now we're full in Area. We have, I think, 120 cores, and we have clearance to do up to 200 of those. So the fourth bullet, H Canyon supporting HV line with a dissolution of plutonium for NNSA mission, and that's on the next slide, which is the HV line mission that I talked about. When MOX starts up, there is the potential to send this plutonium oxide that they've been producing over to them, and they would run it through their process and actually make fuel for it. In the meantime, the material that HB line is producing is being sent over to K Area, and we're lag storing there until needed. And once we're done with the dissolving the material in H Canyon, so let me back up a second. So we're dissolving the plutonium that's stored in K Area in H Canyon. We then send that up to HB line, and the HB line is actively involved in turning that into an oxide. Now, as Max said, considerations that we're having to look at before we can restart that facility. Excuse me. So anyway, after HB line produces the oxide, it will get packaged up, put in 55-gallon drums, and sent back over to K Area for lag storage. Based on the plans that we had last year, we were looking to get out of that in 2018, and then being able to turn that dissolver over to additional spent fuel with a delay, probably bleeding over tonight. And also, like I said, we work closely with a high-level waste system, and we really try to minimize the waste that we send there. Back in 2004, we had a huge effort to reduce, I think we did by about 60% the waste that we were sending over to the tank farm, and now we further reduced it. And the reason why we had to go back and look at it again, one of the drivers was the waste system. And then these are old numbers, they fluctuated, but these were the numbers that were getting back last year around June, July of 2014. But typically the canyon would send about 300,000 gallons of waste over to the tank farm. The 300,000 number was a historical number when we were operating at very high capacity doing spent fuel. But the added mission of doing the plutonium up in HV line could have caused that number to exceed 500,000. So one of the things we've worked on and we haven't quite completed is being able to use some of the nitric acid solution that is a filtrate solution. So once you filter out the plutonium oxalate, you're left with a solution that has a little bit of plutonium in it. But we were looking at being able to reuse that in the canyon. If we do that, that'll be a big waste. But there are about 15 or 16 different waste minimization activities that we looked at, and we've implemented several, and we're continuing to look at those as we need to. Excuse me, 1 second.
Jay, explain the two dissolvers, I don't think they did.
Okay. Yeah, the two dissolvers are what we call 6-1 and 6-4. They occupy each, well, let me back up for a second here. The canyon is segmented into about 18 different sections, and each section is about 40-something feet long. In section 6, which is going to be somewhere right around in here, two dissolvers over on the far side of the canyon, which is the hot side of the canyon, which is where the material is introduced for first processing. Once it's cleaned up some, it comes over to the close side, if you will, and that's called the warm side. So the hot side has two dissolvers, 6-1 and 6-4. 6-1 is where we're doing the plutonium dissolution right now, and 6-4 is where we get spent fuel. And one of the things about 6-1 is we're going to have to replace that at some point, so we actually have a spare for that. The 6-4 dissolver is still in full operation, and if we need to, we could procure one of those. And if you, who are you cab members? David, I don't know if you've seen this before. Of course, Don's seen it before. But we have a pad out there in H area, and if you get a chance to see, we actually have some equipment out there that you can look at. You have an idea of how large the equipment is that goes into the canyon. One of the things that's sitting out there is a mixture settler bank, and it was built in 1954. We've never had to replace one of those, but we do have a replacement. We have. Were you thinking about anything else?
No, I just wanted to understand that there were two dissolvers, so that's why we can process the spent fuel and the plutonium. They're not combined together, they're separate.
And the flow paths for the material are different. So the plutonium piping tanks, then what the spent fuel solutions would go through. Okay, here's HP line, a little bit better stuff. This is let me show you this slide first. This blue section again is the canyon that I showed you right here. This up here. So now you're going to be looking at it from the right side of the slide. So now you're looking at it from the south end, and again, the HP line is a soft structure, and these are the two levels that are concrete. The much taller thing is actually an elevator that goes up there for material, and then there's a people elevator that's over here in blue. So here you see a shot of one of the glove boxes. There are actually three lines in HP lines called phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 is where we can dissolve material to send down to the canyon if we were doing that, and we're currently not dissolving material up there. We're dissolving it in the canyon. We also use phase 1 or have used it for repackaging as well as sections of phase 3. Phase 2 is where we're doing the plutonium oxide production, and we've also done neptunium oxide in that line also. And then phase 3 was used back when we were doing plutonium-238 for the complex and for NASA. Phase 3 is very, very similar to phase 2. The facilities are extremely alike. So HB line began the plutonium oxide production for potential mixed oxide feed back in July of 2014, about the same time we were wrapping up the sodium experiment fuel and getting into the fuel for recovery. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of activity in both facilities, a lot of resources being consumed, a lot of people time, so to speak, in H Canyon and HB line. Let me, anybody have any quick questions? Okay.
There are two online.
Okay, I can go ahead and entertain.
Both of these. The first one is the planning basis still to finish H Canyon operations by 2020 and then begin DNV? And might this date change and why?
It may change, and that may have to do with some of the assumptions that are planning as to whether we put in a third dissolver or not. And, but yes, it may. We haven't done that yet, but it could. Okay.
And then the other one is, sorry, as plutonium disposition relates to H Canyon, HP line, and K area, when will the DOE report on plutonium disposition as waste to LIP and as MOX be released? It was due to Congress today or tomorrow.
Don't know. Anybody?
That's the responsibility of the NNSA.
Yeah.
And so
Yes, don't know. So good question. Okay, so now that we talked about plutonium there, good lead in for K area. So K area, as I said, is a former reactor facility. The reactor part of the facility has been removed, and we're actually using the area where the reactor was for storage, and we've also converted some other areas within K area for storage. And I wish I had. Okay, I wish I had. I don't think I have a picture. No, I don't. But I do have a picture in the future presentation. I think Alan Gunner is going to come in a month or two and show the page. But we can show you where the drums are stored and what they look like. Well, like I said, most of the plutonium and uranium all the plutonium and uranium is really stored in 55-gallon or 30-gallon drums. There's a standard, which I mentioned down here, which is a DOE standard. In fact, it's abbreviated DOE-STD-3013. So if you hear about 3013, it's not necessarily a quantity, but it's a type of storage standard that most of the material in K area has been packaged to. And it's a very long-term storage capability, nominally about 50 years. Very rigorous testing. And because of that, we also do testing on containers that are stored in K area. And those are DEs, or destructive examinations. We'll actually open a can, check for corrosion in the can, check for gases that were evolved during the storage of that material, look for any other problems that we might see. And today we haven't seen anything that really poses a challenge to the 50-year storage. But we then send those the oxide samples, and then also send the container up to SRS, and they do more analysis on that. But so our assumption is that we're going to continue with safe storage, receipts, and shipments until approximately 2039. And again, that date could change, and that's based on only using one glove box line in K area to disposition the non-MOXable plutonium. So there is a set of plutonium in K area that can go directly to MOX if they choose to accept it. There is a subset that is being run through HB line for cleanup and oxide production that could go to K area. And then there's a set of material that, even if we tried to clean it up, just would not be worth the effort. And that material will be dispositioned directly to WIP. In fact, we've already done some of that material. We actually blended some of that down in HB line previously, but we're going to move that operation to K area. So the date right now is based on just having one line blending down or preparing plutonium that is non-MOXable to send to WIP. We're looking at actually adding 2 additional lines, so that date would move up or to the left, as you might say. So we're going to continue destructive examinations, and through 2026, again, that's based on several assumptions. It could be 27, 28, and maybe we've got all the information we need in 24 or 25. So right now we're saying 2026 to support all the information that we need to derive from the storage of that material. L area, another major facility for us. As I said, that fuel is stored, and we do have some material there. And again, said there that by sending approximately 1/3 of that material to Canyon for processing, we won't need to install a new storage capacity in L area, and they'll be able to support all their expected receipts through the life of the facility. And I did mention that right now we're looking at no new foreign research reactor fuel receipts past May 12, 2019, and that's actually in the record of decision, which is an ROD as a part of the NEPA process. The domestic research reactor receipts will be supported through 2035. We receive fuel, universities, and other research facilities in the U.S. And there's also a large amount of heavy water stored in L area, K area, and C area. That material, the heavy water, is managed by L area, even though it's stored in those other facilities. We'll continue to store that until there's a disposition path for that material, or somebody finds another use. Support facilities. I know I've already talked about FH labs or H area laboratory. And the reason why it's called H area laboratory actually sits in F area. It's supported the canyon that are both in F area and H area. There's an F canyon, this facility, an H canyon, that water the same capability. The way they would run is F areas typically would process plutonium, and H areas would process uranium. But we'll continue. They'll continue to support our facilities as needed, and then also the site infrastructure, waste management, medical, safeguard, security. You can read those later if you want, but all those will exist while our facilities are operating. 235F. I mentioned that we have some residual 238 in that facility, and we're going to reduce and or immobilize what is remaining in that facility. Actually, the end state of that facility has not been determined yet, but we know that there are some things that we have to do to get to that point, and then we'll talk to the state, figure out exactly what that end state is. The activation project plan that we're operating under was approved back near the end of 2013. And also we've had some other facilities listed here. I mentioned the F Canyon. There was an FB line that sits on top of F Canyon. It's been partially deactivated, awaiting further deactivation. I think Dawn knows a lot about that. There's also a facility called Rub-Off, is where we received off-site fuels. Back in, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, we consolidated all the fuel that was rub off over to L area. So that has also undergone some initial deactivation. And then C area that I mentioned, we still use it for offices and also for heavy water storage. And that's a picture of 235F, concrete facility, similar in construction to the canyon. So a summary, safety comes first. Some of our facilities are one-of-a-kind national assets. A great example of that is the canyon. It is the last remaining radioisotopic separation facility, large scale, that is still operating in the country. We stabilized disposition of nuclear materials to, again, allow for de-inventory of DOE facilities, including NNSA facilities, to meet non-proliferation goals for NNSA and others. And then we also operate in an environmental sound manner. So, any questions at this point?
Actually, it's kind of a question. I don't have a work plan in front of me. Is the station in our work plan?
I think so, right?
I think it's in the facility DNR.
Oh, is it in the facility?
Yeah, it's not
Okay.
in the initial materials. I think they still have it in the one.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think and there was a presentation given in January on the status of the 235. It was the second day when you were,
Oh, well, I couldn't.
when you did make
I think you wanted to hear anyway.
Good memory.
But did it go over all the things you were talking about of replacing?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Previous presentation did that presentation. We can get you a copy of
I
that.
liked it.
on the that website.
Website, okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, we have a lot of public comment and question about Canadian fuel and German fuel and that sort of thing. And I get tied up in terminology. So on page 12, I'm just trying to clarify
Page 12 of,
the presentation.
oh, okay, I'm sorry.
And it says, no nuclear foreign research reactor fuel repeat. So are we talking as May 12th, 2019. You see that sentence?
I'm sorry.
Second
This
bullet.
sentence right here.
Uh-huh.
So, when you talk about foreign research reactor fuel receipts, does that mean the Canadian fuel and the German fuel?
The NRU, NRX,
NRX, oh, yes, I see that, NRX is the Canadian fuel, and that is covered under the FRR program. The German fuel is not part of the FRR program, so it's not covered into that record of decision. We're working on an environmental assessment for that fuel at this time. We hope to have that out early summer.
The German.
On the German.
Okay, and how does the law run on that? So, you know, when it says past May 12th, 2019, does that mean, well, if it starts May 1st and we haven't finished yet, we'll keep on going till 2020 or 2020?
Right now, the way that the record of decision is, those shipments would end on May 12th. Now, that's an NNSA program for the return, so they may be looking at extensions. I just don't know that if they are. But right now, we've been told to assume they stop on May 12th
Okay.
of 2019.
Which you said that they've been known to have extensions past that.
But they would have to go through the NEPA process for those extensions.
and that would include public comment and all that. So right now, as this says, this is an assumption, and assumptions can change, but as Maxine and Jay said, our plan is today, the program will end on that date.
Okay. And
If it changes, like other things can change, public comment, that would be part of the NEPA process, National Environmental Policy Act, and that there's public participation built into that process.
Okay, and then just clarifying definitions here. We're talking just the receipts, not the processing.
Correct.
Right.
So there would be another NEPA document that would go through it for processing, and processing would to go
Oh my
forward.
gosh.
Yeah, there are separate documents typically to cover, called environmental impact statements, upon which all these decisions are based.
Okay.
Okay? Thanks.
Jay, this is kind of a side question. It has nothing to do with the materials, but you mentioned transite in H Canyon.
Right.
Is that the asbestos-based product?
Yeah.
And my question on that is there a lot of asbestos left in Savannah River site?
You mean like insulation on piping?
Yeah.
If you get a chance to go back, you've been through the canyon before?
Yes.
Okay. On the second level, you remember the little elevator ride?
Mm-hmm.
To the second level, you go in. A lot of the services are on that floor, and what I remember is a lot of that piping has non-asbestos. But typically, they haven't gone in and wholesale replaced asbestos insulation for the sake of replacing insulation, because, you know, when you do that, it's a hazard. And so typically what facilities have done is as they've had to effect a repair on something or had to make a modification, that's when they'll actually go in and mess with the asbestos itself. But I think a lot of the asbestos in the facility is gone. I don't have a percent number off the top of my head. But I know on the second level, from what I remember looking around, a lot of that is wasted.
Thank you.
I just had a related question. A lot of the newspaper articles now about the funding, specifically the funding for replacing equipment, broken equipment, new equipment coming in. Is this a concern to this area? And I heard you mention one that you had a replacement piece of equipment already there. Is the money coming in for this? The newspapers are like, you know, the money's not really there.
Well, just like in my private life, my paycheck, Tony and Pat, isn't quite as big as I'd like it to be. And, you know, we always wish we had more funding. And, fortunately, we have to live within our means. But I will say this, that, you know, for safety-related equipment, we will take the time, we will spend the money to replace that equipment and make the operation safe. And on the other hand, we try to keep a number of spares. And there are some things that are just very expensive, and we would have to take resources, people, we can either give money to people to operate, or we can give money to buy things. So it's a juggling act. And so far, we have been, you know, I wouldn't say lucky, but we've had good planning. We've been fortunate. I mean, there is a risk that a major piece of equipment that maybe we don't have a spare for, but we don't expect would fail, could fail. And we might shut down and then have to do what we have to do to go get that equipment and buy it.
Again, Ms. Virginia Jones, part of the newspaper article content was saying that there's numbers of different types of equipment that have to be replaced. One of the particular groups of equipment is your antiquated equipment for which there is no replacement.
Right.
And you're having to go different countries.
There were,
is that a problem?
Well, one of the things, and Maxine could probably talk about this because she's heavily involved in this, but we have some major electrical substations in L&K area that we're involved in replacing, and it's going to be, you know, several millions of dollars to repair those, and we're actively engaged in repairing them. There, as an example, another example, in the canyon, we have, I think it's 9 operating evaporators. Evaporators because they have heating coils, and so you would heat them up, and then you put old material and you heat them up. So you can imagine we like to keep about 3 spares of evaporators on hand for that. We also carry spare agitators. In the canyon, we don't use a whole lot of pumps, but we do use some pumps. We'll carry spare pumps, things like that. I mean, infrastructure, especially for the site. I mean, a lot of the site was built back in the 1950s, so it is a real concern, and it really is a juggling act. I mean, we could reduce our risk of a failure that would take us down for months or whatever at a time if we had more money to spend. But the reality is the budgets are tight, and we have to live within our means.
And I guess a follow-up is the reality of our government. No comments there, but the reality of our government is that when we had to move the hydrocores because it was running out of room, all of a sudden there was money, and the government said, "Oh, we have this money, we're good." So my question or comment is, if we get to the point where we need this evaporator or equipment, is the government going to say, "Oh yeah, we've got some money and we'll send it to you"? Is that your experience in the past, or?
Well, like I said, we've never had a major system within a facility fail such that we were down for a very, very significant long period of time, months and months and months and months. That hasn't happened. I mean, things do break, and if we have the replacements, you know, we can take the week or whatever it takes to actually replace that component and be back at operating. Like I said, we've been very careful. We've done a lot of risk analysis, looked at what might fail, what might not fail, and we try to keep those spares on hand. Pat, do you want to add, or
I'll add one thing. The site has a critical infrastructure priority list. So each facility has had to identify their major infrastructure needs and what those risks are for that. And as Jay mentioned, our reliable power for L area and K area are on the top of that list. So we're now working through trying to get those replaced because they are 60-year switchgear. Parts aren't available. Our guys are good on eBay, but they're just not out there on eBay. So we're going through and working that. So the site infrastructure, critical infrastructure list is our priority list of how we work those things down when we do have money available to go after it. So that's what we've done. We've got a systematic approach to try to address those issues.
What I was leading up to, Larry, was some committee discussion on, you know, is it something that the task committee can make a recommendation? Since it's in the newspapers, oh my gosh, 2 weeks worth of articles on this. Is this something that DOE, a recommendation from CAB on the area of, you know, money for critical infrastructure? Is that something that would have an effect? Be tossed in the wastebasket with everything else? So that was the question I was going to bring up during committee discussion. And I guess I'm saying, do y'all want to comment on that? Is that something that we've done, that CAB has done in the past? Would that be something that DOE would, I know they've got to look at it.
Well, I think we should probably discuss that after we
Okay.
got Jay free and.
I mean, the answer I would give is that, the CAB, of course, you know, supports Denver and, very knowledgeable of the funding constraints, of course, that we have. And we try to carefully spend that money and again, balance people versus stuff. I think, you know, and I'm glad Maxine mentioned that integrated priority list. It's hundreds of items on there. Each facility comes up with their top list and they're ranked according to criteria, safety, and other things. And we meet periodically, usually about every 3 months, and we go through that list and we look at the ranking and so forth. And we, as funding is available, or for large items, like, I mean, the substations in L&K, very expensive. And they've been on the list for several years. But occasionally you have just a little bit of money. Well, there's something that might be further down the list, but hey, we can start and finish that. So it's not that you typically would always work off the top of the list, but we do, the stuff that's on the top, we don't want to have it sit there very long. Anything else?
Yeah, when you have this critical list, I'm assuming you mean that it's not funded. This is kind of like.
Oh, no, there are, what it is it really gives the department, it gives the management Savannah Riverside an idea of the total list of items that are deteriorating, or that could fail, but not everything on that list has to be replaced right now. In fact, there are things that are prioritized that we've looked at. If we do have the money, you know, we're going to look at replacing that as 18 or 19 or 20. And like you said, I mean, I've read the articles in the paper, and the people at the site are very creative as far as, you know, taking equipment from F area and reusing it in H. And we have actually purchased things off of eBay. Some of the control equipment up in HV line, there was some, I forget what PLC stands for, but it's a programmable logic controller. But it's a very old technology, probably introduced in those facilities in the 70s or 80s. And at the time, you know, quite cutting edge. But it's not that it doesn't do the job. It's just that if a component fails, nobody makes, or very few people make those things, and in some cases don't make it anymore. So yeah, we have had to, in fact, HB line about 2 years ago, there were 4 major PLC systems up there, and we replaced one of those with what is the newest technology. So yeah, it's not that we're not making progress, we do make progress, but that list gives us an idea of how big the issue could be.
Is Dan Kaminsky, CAB, is DOE or SRS looking at, when you do some of these upgrades, that you're salvaging the old components and cataloging them for other sites' use?
I know in the past we have.
So we don't have to find them on eBay?
Yeah, I know we have accessed materials and sent them to other sites. Yeah. There is a system out there, and I'm just not all that familiar with it, but I know there's a system. I know that we've accessed material to it that other people have been able to use. We had a particular type of storage container, I can't think of the name, but we had hundreds of them, and we found some reuse for some of those containers. But yeah.
Continuing, and I think it's some of your concern, Jenny. I read the articles as well, and the way they come across is like this 30 million per year for the next 3 years is somehow a surprise that the facility overnight turns 60, and they're talking very short-term budget. And I would be more interested in learning what's the long-term budget? So you have a plan, obviously, but the public's not necessarily made keenly aware of this plan. So some of these articles does not give us a lot of confidence into the long range. What are we doing with this? Will it last the next generation? Can any of that be?
Awesome.
Brian?
Very good points. And as you see, some of these missions go through 2035. I mean, that's another several decades. And these facilities, some are already 60 years old. Can they run it through 2035, 2045? Yes, they can, but you have to reinvest in the infrastructure. You have to do that. Just like you're going to have to replace your air conditioning on your home. You have to replace the roof. Will the structure be sound? Yes, but you have to continue to reinvest. And unfortunately, just like Jay and Maxine have said, budgets are very tight. And we manage our priorities. And I just want to reinforce what Jay said. At no time there'll be a compromise to any nuclear safety systems. Though the investment and replacement and maintenance and surveillance of those important nuclear safety systems is #1 priority. And therefore, there is no safety concern with some of these maintenance backlogs and non-investment in infrastructure. So just from a safety perspective, just want to communicate to you, not a safety issue. So it could have significant impact on completing a mission, okay? So we have some plans to go through 2035. If we don't reinvest in some of the infrastructure, our ability and confidence that those facilities will be able to continue through 2035 or beyond is lower. The confidence won't be there. So just like a lot of things, can you limp along and allow your air conditioner to run one more year? Let's say it's 15 years old, and let's say the design life is 15 years. Yeah, you might be able to get another year out of it. And that's what we try to balance. How efficient is it operating? Is it failing every day, and so we have to go do repairs more frequently? Then that's going to basically get our awareness and say, okay, now's the time. We can't limp along anymore. And so if our funding levels are pretty level, they're not expected to increase over the next several years, we're going to probably have to slow down our processing rates and take the money that we would invest in processing maybe at a normal capacity and take that money invested in infrastructure. And so those are the decisions we make each and every day. This critical infrastructure list, critical, okay, may have a different meaning to some people. Critical may be safety. So I want to take that off. That nothing that would detrimentally impact the safety of the workers' public environment is a concern. If the power and electrical substations were to go out, okay, would not create a release of any radioactive material or anything like that. We have backup systems, and we'd be able to bring an electrical skid to provide the electrical power that we need. It is a concern, and it's to continue the missions through 2035. It will take an investment, but with level funding, we have to balance those priorities, juggle the priorities, as Jay and Maxine have said. And it may take a slowdown of operations in order to reinvest those dollars into infrastructure.
Yeah.
I have two on my questions from time limits again. The first one is, what is the status of possible receipt of exotic materials such as plutonium booster rods from Canada and UK-owned HEU of Soviet origin from the Republic of Georgia? Would you like to read it?
I have no knowledge of those two items.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't have any knowledge of those. NNSA is responsible for the fuel that comes back, so they would have the lead responsibility. When they get close to a decision, that's when they bring EM in to talk about what would its disposition tax be. We've not been contacted by NNSA on either of those activities yet.
And then the second one is, will DOE prepare a proliferation assessment on the reprocessing of the German spent fuel?
That's also an NNSA activity. I know that that's being evaluated. I don't know what the answer is going to be on that.
All righty. Yes.
Jay, would you go to your slide, I think it'd be 3. That slide here, demonstrates very clearly the integral part that H Canyon plays for operations and planning at, SRS. And about, I think it was 3 years ago now, the government was actually going to shut down H Canyon. They were gonna stop funding, the plan was possibly to take it down to min-safe level, not shutter it, but min-safe level, so that it couldn't perform, any of the, processing, plans that were in the works. And you can see how that would systemically affect things across the spectrum of the SRS. We make a great deal, to do about emptying the tanks as our #1 priority, as we should. But I would just urge the CAB to very closely watch what goes on with H Canyon, because they have almost been through Fund 1. They could do it again because of lack of wisdom. And you can see that if they did, the impact would be across the entire site. Thank you.
And Jay Ray, I'll just add to that, there are, like in a household, you know, my wife and I rarely ever agree. Well,
Fine.
She's always right. And so, you don't have any comments.
Not yet.
But, you know, sometimes within the department too, you have certain elements that, you know, they want to use the funding for other things. And so you can imagine that it's a tug of war sometimes. So, yeah, there were elements that said, you know, if we shut down the canyon, look at all the money that we could put somewhere else. But then there were other elements within the department that said no. So, yeah, but good point. I mean, the canyon is a topic of discussion, a lot. Anything else? All righty, well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jay. That was very good, presentation. Thank you. And so we move on to our committee discussion. Really have anything formally to discuss. I mentioned earlier that we've got several open recommendations. I'd kind of like for all the committee members to look over those open recommendations. I don't see any reason why all of those can't be closed. They've all been answered, and I think satisfactorily answered, as well as DOE can answer them. Some of them are unanswerable, but I think we're in a position to close all those recommendations. So you just look over those between now and the next meeting in May, and we'll maybe close those in May.
Virginia, Jim, I could support what you're saying, that we've also, I agree that I think we can look them over and close them, and that pass now, that it's good to go ahead and let them go, and if we have a question about them, we can start a new recommendation.
I agree, yeah.
Focus it down more.
Okay.
Harold Simon, Cab. If you have an open recommendation that you have questions on, instead of starting a new recommendation, you can leave it open and write a letter or something for in terms of answering those unanswered elements of that recommendation, instead of restarting the whole thing over again.
David? Yeah.
I just want to make an observation. At the last full CAB meeting, each of the agencies, DOE, EPA, and the state, give an agency update on the second day. And, the DOE agency update on the second day of the last meeting, mentioned nothing about the agitator incident in H Canyon and the subsequent, investigations that are still ongoing. They only made the explanation of what that was all about in response to a CAB question. And I frankly find that it was very disturbing for them to just gloss over that in their agency update, and it shouldn't happen again. Something that important deserves to be brought before the CAB and at least informed.
That's a good comment, David. I'm not quite sure where to go with that. I guess maybe just the fact that you've brought it up. You know, the only thing we can do here, I guess, is to make a recommendation and maybe,
Well, I don't intend to propose a recommendation for it. The ears that were intended to hear it are here.
heard it. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I've given the members a copy of a recommendation that I'm playing with. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere or not, but I'd ask that there again, take this home and read over it, see if it makes any sense to you. Send me some emails. Let me know what you think about it, and be brutally critical if you'd like. I'm new at this, and but basically what I'm saying, James, I'm allowed to kind of go over this, aren't I? I guess. Okay. I'm just saying that we've got some really good technology at SRS to do certain things with, but our shortcoming seems to be where we put all this stuff after we get through with it. And it's just suggesting some alternate methods of disposing of what we've already got. So like I say, just if you would just read it over and.
If I could, I've read it over, look, you know, just have a couple of things. First of all, there's only, if it doesn't get extended, the only foreign entity that's going to send anything of any consequence is Canada at this point, right?
We have other, countries that are on the list, but of the substantial amount, it would be Canada, you're correct.
And there are countries that don't have to pay us because they don't have very much money. Canada's paying.
Canada's a high-income country.
But the ones that are not high-income countries don't even pay us for the receipt of it. Okay, there's no way that those countries would ever be able to have a facility to transport the material back to them for them to store it. There's no way that would ever happen. And the other part of it is, if that did ever happen, it would all be NNSA activity. It wouldn't be our activity. So it wouldn't be an EM activity. So that's what would end up coming back to us, is it's not an EM activity. So it's while it's a really cool idea, it's not something that would most likely ever get implemented. Seeing what we're talking about here. So tell me if I'm off base.
I don't have to see. I don't have to see. No.
Can you,
It fell in the
can
rain.
you kind of,
Go in the rain. I've got a copy.
Okay. Could you give me the history of this recommendation and its drafting?
There is no history. I just sat down at my desk one day and said, you know, wouldn't this be a cool thing if we could work out some sort of a swap for spent nuclear fuel for treated nuclear fuel? I mean, the basis of it is it's difficult to treat this nuclear fuel and make it stable so that it's not dangerous anymore. Our problem is we don't have anywhere to put it after we do that. The buildings that we put it in are low-tech buildings. The transporters carried around with are low-tech machinery. So if we could just require the countries that give us the fuel to build an area like Area S, but not near that big. It doesn't have to be huge, just an area that they could put some of our canisters in.
In their country.
In their country. it doesn't have to be like exchange.
Share
It
the
could
pain.
be uranium, graphite uranium in exchange for vitrified glass that came from our plant. It's just a way to get rid of some of it and let them be a part of, okay, we're not just dumping it back to the United States. They're gonna expect us to do something in return.
If I can elaborate a little bit, when we were kind of brainstorming it in the beginning, it was like, well, they gotta send it down. So it's in some sort of transport vehicle.
Yeah,
It's in some sort of transport container. Okay, they're gonna take the material out and give it to us. Well, we've got an empty container
got an empty
here.
ship, yeah.
You know, with a transport vehicle that's gonna go back to where it came from. So, hey, you guys, is there some way we can fill it with some already previously processed stuff?
And we've been told
Put
that
it
it's,
back in the empty container, which has gotta go back to Canada or wherever.
Well, that's not necessarily true, but it's not that easy.
Yeah,
That's what
it's,
the- you know, we don't
it's not
know.
that easy. I agree with your comments in terms of, the affordability and feasibility of it. Not only that, but it's not legal. We could not legally do that. The Nuclear
And that would be
Waste
a
Policy
proliferation
Act of
issue
this
and
country
everything, too.
requires that high-level waste be disposed of in a United States geological repository, not a foreign repository.
And then you'd have all kinds of proliferation issues because it doesn't
Yeah,
actually
not to
document.
mention proliferation issues.
So and then the transports that's used for it, aren't all the ones that are used for ours are the NAC,
The majority of our fuel does come in the NAC LWC.
and that those are US owned transports that are very few,
There's 8 in the world.
and so you can't, it's not just that you have a thing and it's gonna go back empty. It doesn't go back empty. It goes somewhere else to get used for something else. And it's not designed for putting 10-foot long, 2-foot diameter stainless steel casks in. It would have to be an entirely new package for doing that. There's so many technical reasons. I mean, from a thought process, it's a great idea, but there's so many reasons that
it can't work.
that it couldn't happen. And, now for somebody like Canada, of course, with them, you know, they've got a lot more infrastructure and it's a huge amount, but they are paying a lot of money. Unlike most countries, they're paying a lot of money to ship that stuff here.
Wouldn't they entertain the idea of paying less money and receiving some of this waste, these canisters?
Probably
We
not.
haven't broached that with them, but I know that they have an issue because it's U.S. origin material. They would like it to come back. They call it repatriation.
Mm-hmm.
So they would like to repatriate that material back to the United States.
And all those agreements have already been signed. It would have to be renegotiated.
Do they pay legacy costs? So as we have to store this for another 100 years, are they going to be paying us in 100 years?
No, so the
One
fees are
time.
established in the federal register, and it's not a full cost recovery fee. A fee that was identified at the time, it was revised in, 2012. So the fee will go up in 16, but it's based on a kilogram, dollars per kilogram based on their uranium.
But they also pay the money ahead of time, which most people don't ever do, to be able to get the infrastructure that's needed to do that. So,
Yeah, they did a prepayment of $10 million so that we could do the modifications to the shielded transfer system in our area, just to receive their fuel.
it is a cool idea, but between the legal and all the technical, do you have any idea how long it takes to design and build and license cask? Takes years. And, so it's just not a feasible option.
Does anyone else anywhere in the world have a storage facility for
Vitrified,
or, yeah, any kind of treated
Sweden
nuclear?
is the one with the most advanced system. So Sweden has one. I believe it's Sweden. Sweden is the one I guess.
Sweden.
Sweden has the most advanced system. All the other countries are working on theirs, so they don't really have one. France actually has a reprocessing facility similar to H Canyon that they use, and a lot of the European countries would use that facility. There's also a reprocessing facility in, and I always say it wrong, Pakistan, Kazakh, yeah. And then I believe there's also a, reprocessing facility in, North Korea, or is it South Korea? One of the Koreas.
Now,
Those are the only ones in the world.
these are the processing facilities, but do they actually store the material after it's been processed?
have to have a way.
It's different for each facility. Like France, they don't. They send it back to the actual person that sent them the material. They get some material back in return.
They store their own.
They store their own fuel.
Right.
But if it's another country that has sent to them, then they will send it back to them under the European Union.
Is this mainly commercial fuel?
It is mostly commercial fuel, not the research reactors, because they can't afford the large cost of all of that activity.
Okay.
So, Pat McCoy with DOE, not to give you any ideas or anything, but your recommendation, or draft recommendation, had about vitrified waste. My perspective is that is a very, very, very low risk. It's in the safest form it could ever be, that we technically know what to do with. So, from the state of South Carolina, I don't want to speak for DHEC, but that's probably a very safe form. So, trying to say, let's get rid of that to another country, as David said, I don't think it's a mountain, probably not for climbing. However, with your other discussion about infrastructure, that probably is a fairly good risk. So as you contemplate, maybe as we bring back different materials, or whether it be from other DOE sites or other countries, there is a fee established, as Maxine said, but you may make a recommendation to do a more fuller cost recovery that would invest in infrastructure that would support the disposition or storage of this, tying back to what Jenny said and tying back to your, that may be, again, I don't want to tell you what to recommend or not, but just tying your 2 points together. Also, the risk of the vitrified waste is very, very low. It would, of everything on the site, my perspective, that would be the least of your concerns. I know it's in the state, and you eventually like it disposition, final disposition, Rose, to the final repository. That, at least from the, the administration's decades in the future, not till 2048 till a final repository is open. So, but with some of these other near-term risks, whether it be infrastructure and things, there may be something that may be beneficial for you to recommend to the department, tying your two concepts together, what Jenny and David talked about infrastructure before. Maybe there's something in there that says, well, if you want us to bring things, we do have a unique national assets here. Maybe there's a reinvestment in infrastructure rather than a curing type thing. Mm-hmm. So again, trying to tie your two concepts together.
Yeah, okay. All right.
I can help you out.
And David's good
Yeah.
with money.
Because you know your environmental stuff too.
Okay, well, that's really all I've got, today. It's, I guess, time for public comment. Are we ahead of time or behind time, or does it matter? We're ahead of time. Can we go ahead and call for public comment now? Is there any public comment? Anybody like to say anything? Okay. Well, if there's nothing further, I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Okay. Good night.